So hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for Coming Back from COVID, a discussion series focused on exploring the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on whole child development. My name is Caitlin Orbanik, and I am a health project coordinator with Children's Institute in Rochester, New York. I'm joined today by a panel of child development experts who I will ask to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Devaney. I am the director of the Whole Child Connection at Children's Institute.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tasha Potter, and I am the director for Equity and Family and Community Engagement in the Greece Central School District.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Shield Jones. I'm a senior consultant with Coordinated Care Services Incorporated, or CCSI, and I specialize in the area of education.
Thank you. So to anyone watching, you can find extended biographies of our panel at the link in our show notes, as well as an email address for any questions about our work or about this discussion. The purpose of our discussion today will be to explore the ways in which adults who work with children may be experiencing an unprecedented amount of stress or anxiety in relation to the pandemic, both as they think about their personal lives and their professional responsibilities. So we know we can all look back to early March when the pandemic began to spread throughout the US, and schools and childcare programs in our area were quite abruptly interrupted, either shut down completely or shifted online. And I've heard from each of you that you observed a huge stress toll that this took on many educators and the result of some potential burnout from those experiences. I know that there were tremendous innovations and expansions in the kind of supports that our educational system offered to families and community members, and school personnel really rose to the occasion and accomplished some amazing things, but that they also maybe felt their roles suddenly balloon to meet these new times. And we've heard a lot about a mindset of just trying to make it through the end of that 2019-2020 school year. So we know we can't go into the coming year with that mindset. And to that end, I'd like to start by asking you all what advice you have for school and program leaders as they're planning for how to support their staff and community families during the coming year. So Elizabeth, let's start with you. What do you suggest we keep top of mind?
I think the thing I've been really focusing on is attending to relationships and just taking care of people. I think there's so much heightened emotion right now with everyone, and everybody's experiencing things in different ways. So the leadership, as you know, as principals, as superintendents, as directors of centers, are having all those emotions about being in charge of a group of people and wanting to support their staff and recognizing all of that. The teachers are going to have emotions about coming back into the classroom, about feeling unsure about what to expect from students. Parents are, grappling with how to manage the whole system and their work, and everybody's coming from different places. And so we just need to be aware that there are so many emotions that people are experiencing, and kind of attending to the relationships, I think is one way through that. Giving people time to process, expecting big behaviors from everyone, not just the kids, but from the adults as well. People are going to be more sensitive and might, get angry faster. So finding opportunities for people to process, giving teachers a chance to have conversations with each other, all of that. And then as leaders, I think it's really important to pay attention to your own self-care and to be, give yourself a break, because I think there's going to be somebody who's mad at you no matter what. This is a tough time. There's no easy solutions and there's no good answers. And we know people are on all different sort of parts of the spectrum on how they feel about the reopening of schools. So I think leaders need to give themselves a little bit of a break and really take care of themselves so that they can come back in and attend to those relationships in their buildings. So that would be my primary advice, is really attend to the relationships.
And I absolutely agree with all of that. I think that the whole focus for us going forward is really to approach everything as a team. There's so much more that we can do collaboratively and collectively than we can do as individuals on our own. And so, Glenn Singleton calls out in his book, Courageous Conversations About Race, that we want to be able to expect and accept non-closure. Unfortunately, because this is all brand new for all of us. We have never lived through anything like this ever before, and it's not clean, it's unsure. We all have questions, And we really have to take the cues from one another. We have to be listening to one another. We have to pick up on what someone else might need. But more importantly, when you go back to the idea of team, really utilizing one another to support one another. And that is everyone in the system, everyone in the organization has a set of strengths. And we want to be able to utilize those strengths to support and move forward so that everyone can feel good about what's happening next. And again, there's so much uncertainty. But at the same time, I feel that, I would want folks to take a look at themselves. So thinking about that self-care, managing your own anxiety before you can start to think about supporting and managing someone else's. But how can we move forward together? We move forward. We move forward together as a team.
I think those insights are so critical and so on point exactly with where I am at as well. I think, in the beginning, we hoped for more of a light switch moment where we'd be away and then we'd be back. And it's really important that we're all recognizing and understanding that it's going to look and feel different. There's likely going to be some ebbs and flows. There's going to be some moments of freedom and moments of restriction as we seek to follow the health and safety guidelines that are so important in keeping us all healthy, right? I think when we look at other disasters that humans have experienced, there are some lessons learned. And we do know from looking back on that literature that our greatest asset in promoting recovery following such events is community cohesion. So simply to echo everything that Elizabeth and Tasha already mentioned, anything that we can do to build senses of relationship, connection, and community are going to pay into the bank of our organizational resilience, our individual resilience, the resilience of our kids and families, and certainly our school communities.
I think that's a huge point. I know that I've heard all of you say that when we think about wanting to support the young people that we work with, the first step to that is that making sure that we are supported as adults. So everything that you've said to this point of ensuring community, ensuring relationships, and banding together speaks to how we're going to be able to make sure that we are supported and able to then do that work of supporting our children and families. So Amy, you were just ending a thought, and I'll ask you to continue that a little bit. I want to dig deeper into the kind of tools or strategies or just things to be aware of as we gear up for fall. So I'll ask you to start. Do you have any suggestions or stories to share about what might be helpful both for leaders and for frontline staff?
Yeah, I really want all educators to remember what they know. When we first began to reckon and wrestle with the idea, I think the big topics really intimidated us. The topic of pandemic as a word, the topic of racial violence or social disparities were big things. And I think we began to see critical questioning and deep reflection and feelings of inadequacy. Am I enough? Do I have the right skills and abilities to meet these challenges? And so certainly for me and some of the educators that I deeply partner with, it was a critical moment for us to find our feet again. And what we did was dig deep in what do we know to be true. And remember that you do know about positive youth development and what it means to help children grow and thrive. We know how to communicate. We know as educators how to share resources and support one another. In the Rochester area region, we've made a deep investment in understanding what is trauma, what is grief and loss, and how to be helpful in those areas. So my greatest advice is simply to stand tall in what you know and use that as secure handholds as you reach for new ideas, new innovations, and new crosswalks in bringing those skills forward into a still unusual landscape.
I would 100% agree with all of that, Amy, and sort of as teachers get into classrooms and are feeling that sort of like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? How do we handle this? Remember that you know a lot. There are a lot of strategies. There's a ton of training. We've done, a ton of work around social emotional learning with schools in this region. Amy, you referenced some of the trauma work. There's a lot that people can draw on in terms of their skills. and really what you know already about kids and what they need. I think kids are very adaptable and resilient and are going to feel safe and comfortable if the adults are conveying comfort and safety and routine. So just rebuilding some routines, and they'll figure out this new normal, as long as they feel like the adults are there and connecting with them. So I'm always going to go back to relationships, and how important it is to make those connections with kids. A hand on the shoulder, something that just kind of conveys safety and comfort, I think is a really important strategy to pull back on. And I think the other thing I would say is just reminding schools that the mental health staff can't manage this crisis alone. They are not going to be sufficient, and they work so hard and put so much dedication and energy in, and no matter how hard they work, they will not have enough hours in the day to support all of the needs. And to just really make this a community level effort to support the kids as they're coming back to school, that the teachers, the custodians, everybody in the building, parents, we're all kind of in this together to support the kids. And I think if we draw on that idea and really try and build things into every interaction with kids, we'll be in better shape than if we're trying to rely on the mental health staff to really solve the social emotional needs, because that's just too big.
I agree with that. And when I think about just like those social emotional learning competencies from CASEL, so how are we managing ourselves, right? So there's that self-awareness, there's that self-management, and in thinking about just the emotions, like the gamut of emotions that we're all going to be bringing to our school buildings when we return in the fall, I absolutely agree with the idea of making sure that all of our constituents. So who are our stakeholders? Who are the people that we really want to make sure are involved in the process, whether it's from our students to our staff to our administrators, and then you think about families, and then you layer in the rest of the community, because it absolutely has to be a community approach in order for us to make sure that we have an awareness for one another, awareness for that trauma sensitive space that we want to make sure that we've created for our students when they return. And again, I think the idea of structure and routine and things that are predictable, like everybody needs that. And I think once you have that schedule of routine back in place, it makes it easier to be able to manage, those emotions. Because we all are going to have these feelings of, wondering what's coming next and how do you manage. I feel that when we closed school in the spring, we were extremely reactive. We were reacting to a crisis. But we've got time now to plan and to prepare and to get ready. And so as we're readying, folks for the return of coming back in the fall and for reopening our schools, we really need to be thoughtful around how to make this feel comfortable, because it's still going to be extremely hard. We've got families and we've got staff that have had some extremely challenging experiences during this time of closure. And so in our preparation, it's about communicating, informing folks, letting them know that it's okay. And we don't have to feel like we're failing at anything, because this is an experience that we're going through for the first time. But it's more about just having grace, like providing a space of grace for one another, with one another, so that we know that it's okay. It's okay. And we're going to continue to walk this walk together, but including all of our constituents, all of our stakeholders. We have to have that as our focus.
That's great. Thank you all. Something I've heard you all say that's kind of a silver lining almost in this when we think about sharing resources is that people are more comfortable or learning to be more comfortable doing this kind of work through a digital space. So when we think about teachers or educators or program leaders sharing lessons learned or collaborating with community members, collaborating with families, people are comfortable using that Google Docs or the Zoom interface or something like that. So I think leaning into some of those strengths as well and saying, look at this huge new skill set that you have. We all struggled to learn it kind of all at the same time, but look what great experts we are now and how we can lean into that. Something that I want to make sure that we talk about is that one of the many results of the pandemic has been a really increased public awareness and understanding and willingness to learn about the disparate impact of this situation on people of color and on vulnerable communities. With regard to the visible and invisible effects of the pandemic, what do we need to keep in mind when we begin building supports for adults in the fall? And Tasha, I know that Greece schools have been thinking about this pretty deeply, so I'd like to ask you to start.
Of course. And so I think that this time, considering the fact that we are living in a pandemic within a pandemic, right? So we have this pandemic of COVID-19, and we also have this pandemic of racism. And we know that both our families and our staff have been struggling. We're struggling. Everyone's struggling as a result of what we have been observing and witnessing here in our country as of late. And so, when you think about how to approach this, what is it? The questions that are being asked, what do we do? How do we manage this situation? And I think it's really about listening. So for us in Greece, we started in the fall during closure, when we started to experience this pandemic within the pandemic, we wanted to listen to our families. And the way that we were able to do this, and Caitlin, you just referenced, like we've become experts now in this virtual space. And so we've been able to engage so many families as a result of having virtual meetings. And we held several virtual meetings. We brought folks together, to have listening circles. We wanted to hear and have them unpack some of the things that were challenging and the things that they were experiencing, and just to have a space to react to the crisis. I think that that's a place where I'm very comfortable with our district that we'll be able to move forward, because we've had this virtual opportunity and it's provided some success with having families be able to come and join us at the table and listen to the voices that we don't often hear from. It's really a time for us to be able to create an awareness. And so as we circled up with families, I think one of the things that's really important is that we have to circle up with our staff too. We need to know how they're feeling. We need to understand what their needs are. And some of the things that we've been able to do is what's really been key this year for us, in my role as a leader for equity, we have also invited some teachers to help to support as equity coaches. We also have some mindfulness coaches, and our equity coaches and our mindfulness coaches have been working collaboratively because our families need to understand how can we unpack some of these very difficult and uncomfortable conversations around race. And so we have our equity coaches working to develop some lessons to support teachers so that they can feel comfortable and confident approaching those courageous conversations. And then our mindfulness coaches, we've been having them really think about that self-care, like thinking about self and understanding that we have to start with ourselves. You referenced earlier that, if our adults aren't taken care of, then our kids, how can we take care of our kids? So it's really been creating an opportunity for these coaches to help and provide resources and organize some things so that our teachers can be better prepared. And I think about the idea of communication. I'll keep coming back to that. Like the more that we communicate, the better the people are able to receive this information and apply it to themselves, but more importantly, apply it to how they're able to interact and support the students that we serve on a daily basis. So if I had one thing to lend to anyone, it would really be to stop and pause and listen intensely, listen deeply, so that we can understand what the voices in our school communities are telling us, so that we can plan and better prepare for the opening that we know that our staff and our students deserve.
Tasha, as you were speaking, I just wanted to leap up and applaud, right? Because you hit on so many critical aspects of what is ahead and what will bring meaningful help to the equation. I think we need to tell the story of our resilience. And to do that authentically, we need to have a realistic eye on what are our challenges, so that we can be responsive to them and craft new innovations and provide supports where needed. I think throughout this conversation, we've recognized that we are all going through these events together, but our experiences within them are vastly different. We may rise and fall in our stress level on any given moment and any given day, but we are impacted. And so by doing that deep listening and thinking about connecting with all of our stakeholders, we will be able to key in on what are the universal strategies that we can put into place to serve all, and we'll create a strong foundation then on which for us to be careful in our monitoring and our listening for those who need more. So that then again, to bring in the multi-tiered system of support, because we have to do it, is thinking about then at our tier 2, who are in our groups that need more support and assistance in a formalized way. And as Tasha and Elizabeth mentioned, keeping your eye on staff too. Don't leave them out of this equation for recognizing that there may be more staff than in a typical school year that needs formalized supports as groups, as small groups, or even as individuals, and making use of those EAP resources or supportive referrals in the same way that we would for kids. But when I say that, I have to remind everyone that we will be okay. Most of us, even in the face of significant trauma and disaster, are okay with our communities of support and informal resources. We need to anticipate and recognize that it is normal and human that we are likely experience heightened levels of stress, anxiety, frustration, and fear. And that we need practical strategies of self-care like deep breathing, exercising, crying, practicing gratitude, talking with a friend, laughing, running, whatever it is for you to help manage those symptoms, because they will start to abate. And we want to learn and recognize for those higher levels of support and save them for those who need it most when it comes to that time. So we can take care of each other, nurture and self-regulate, and then make those supportive referrals where it's needed at that time.
Yeah, as you guys were talking, I guess a couple other things came to mind. And one thing I was thinking about is the fact of, these sort of two things coming, at the same time around the, obviously, COVID and then the national movement around racial justice, is that there's more comfort in having some of the conversations that we've been very uncomfortable having in the past. And so, Tasha, you were giving such good examples of how Greece has just jumped right into those conversations. And I think that's fantastic. And not to shy away from them, to find, to lean in and say, let's use this time to talk about this because it's really complicated and we're all trying to figure out. And to be okay saying, we don't know, we don't have all the answers. We need to start having these conversations together so we can figure it out, because I think people have been so scared to talk about race and racism for fear of saying the wrong thing. And there seems to be a moment where we can maybe get past that fear. So that's one thing that I think we need to think about with the adults. And then the other piece I was wanting to just touch on was sort of not making assumptions about what people's experiences in this pandemic has been, because I think there's a lot of, I've heard from many that, the struggle as teachers to just not be able to communicate with people, and, students are showing up with their cameras off or don't come to class or whatever, and not knowing what that's about. And it's easy to jump into assumptions about what the parents may be doing or not doing, or what that kid's experience is. And so trying to, as hard as we can, not to make assumptions, and checking your own biases, but then also as leaders, understanding that your staff are also probably having a whole variety of experiences depending on who, what their people they're living with are experiencing, what their own situations are, whether they have loved ones who've gone through and been affected. So just not making assumptions about anyone, I think is really important as we all kind of come back together and try and figure out how we're going to go through this.
Those are all excellent points, and there's so much there to be thinking about and to be working through. And in this conversation, I know I've learned so much. There are so many additional pieces I want to make sure that I go back and I rethink about. As we're wrapping up our conversation, is there anything else that you want to add to this discussion? Anything that, any ideas you want to flesh out, or any kind of final thoughts to share with anyone who might be watching?
I would just certainly like to add the fact that, and I know that this has been said throughout our conversation, but there's a group that's around you that you may not even be aware is a support to you, right? And so we really want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of the resources And I mean like the people that are around us within our system to support the work that we know that we have to do. And as much as this is challenging, we also realize that there's so much reward in serving and supporting and helping. But again, start with yourself. Like, you really need to understand how you're doing. And when you're well, you're able to support others around you. But please lean into the people around you, lean on the people around you, because we are a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of resource that we have with one another, in one another.
It's so critical because in times of crisis, and especially as educators, we want to give to our students and families. And whether we're an educator in the role of superintendent, educator in the role of classroom teacher, or educator in the role of bus driver, it's very easy to get tunnel vision and feel like I must now be all things to all of the people that I interact with. And really remembering we have internal supports and we can share in these efforts with this common goal of helping us all get through and thrive again, right? And that does not end at the school boundaries, right? The district borders. There are and continue to be really important community resources to gain knowledge, to partner with other school districts, to seek supportive referrals if there is a need for a more high-level intervention or support for a particular staff and family. The Consortium on Trauma, Illness, and Grief in Schools, which many of our schools in Monroe County and beyond are connected to, is there as a resource. Remember those, because we also are committed to help and supporting you in your work to support kids and families.
And I think I would just, going back to Tasha's word of grace, just give yourself so much grace and give everybody around you so much grace. I just have been thinking about, as I was listening to my kids' district talk about their opening plans, all I could think about was the staff at the district who was trying to make this happen and how unbelievable the job was that they were having to coordinate. And, as a parent, might have my own feelings about the situation, but, in my professional world can think about what the staff are experiencing. And I just think we all need to, teachers need to give parents grace, parents need to give their kids grace, kids, we all just need to be aware that we're all doing the best we can. Everybody's figuring this out, and being together, attending to those relationships, and just being aware that we're all, all doing the best we can is really the best advice I can give.
That's huge. And I'll just echo one thing that Amy said. So often when we think about self-care, it's easy to just say, oh, I don't have time to do that exercise, or to take that bubble bath, or to, take those few moments for myself. But it really is in response to symptoms of stress and anxiety that we will all be feeling. It's treatment for a need. It's not just a few selfish minutes, as sometimes we hear it categorized. So again, it's giving yourself that grace and that space to lean into what you need so that you're able to take care of everything else that may be being asked of you.
And accept with gratitude those moments where ease may be found, because it is a marathon, not a sprint, and celebrate it, accept it, because you will be expending energy later.
Absolutely. I think we can all agree with that. So I want to thank anyone who tuned in for this conversation. And I want to again encourage any viewers or listeners to find out more about our panel at the link in our show notes, and contact us with any questions or thoughts that you may have. And there will be an email address there as well. We hope that this was useful, and we wish you just all the best in your work supporting children and families, and in your work supporting yourself. So thank you very much.